My name is Alex Carter. I'm 41 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've made a living as a wildlife photographer. Before that, I spent 8 years in the Army. I tell you this not to brag, but so you understand, I'm not the kind of man who scares easily. I've spent more nights under the stars in remote wilderness than I have in city hotels. I know the sounds of the forest. I know the tracks of every creature that walks, crawls, or slithers through the Pacific Northwest. I thought I did anyway. What I saw at my grandparents' house, it changed everything. It broke the world I thought I knew. My wife Megan and I inherited the house after my grandmother passed away. It was an old place built by my grandfather's own hands in the late 50s, nestled deep in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. It wasn't a cabin. It was a proper 2-story house with solid cedar siding and a green metal roof. But it was isolated. The nearest town was a 40-minute drive away, and the last 5 miles to the house were on a winding, unpaved gravel road that the county only bothered to grade twice a year. For me, that isolation was the appeal. It was a place of quiet, of childhood memories, of peeling apples with my grandma on the porch, and learning to shoot a .22 rifle with my grandpa in the woods behind the house. We decided to spend a full month there in late October, a couple of years back. The goal was twofold: to start the long process of sorting through decades of family heirlooms, and for me to get some prime shots of the autumn colors and the local elk herds during the rut. Megan, a painter, was thrilled at the prospect of an uninterrupted month with her easel and a whole new landscape to capture. We packed up our truck, told our friends we'd be off the grid, and headed for the mountains. The first week was idyllic. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. The days were filled with the quiet work of packing boxes, and the evenings were spent by the massive stone fireplace, sipping whiskey and listening to the wind sigh through the towering Douglas firs that crowded the property. The property itself was about 10 acres, mostly dense forest, with a clearing of about 2 acres around the house. A small, well-maintained lawn gave way to a vegetable garden my grandma had long since let go wild, and beyond that, the wall of trees began. My grandpa had cut a few walking trails through the woods, and I spent the first few days reacquainting myself with them, checking for fallen trees and overgrowth. Everything was exactly as it should be. The jays were squabbling, the squirrels were frantically burying nuts for the winter, and in the evenings, we could hear the distant, haunting bugle of a bull elk. It was perfect. It was home. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. It happened on the 8th day. I woke up just before dawn, as I usually do, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I always sleep with the window cracked, even when it's cold, because I love the sounds of the forest, waking up. But that morning, there was nothing. No birdsong, no chattering squirrels, no distant rustle of a deer moving through the underbrush. It was a dead, heavy silence, the kind that feels like a weight on your eardrums. I stood by the open window, the steam from my coffee mug warming my face, and just listened. The silence was so profound, it was unnatural. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a predator was nearby, a cougar or a bear, and the smaller animals were laying low. It made sense. I'd seen cougar tracks on the property before. I mentioned it to Megan when she woke up, but I kept my tone light. "Something big must be on the prowl," I said. "The woods are dead quiet." She just nodded, absorbed in sketching the way the early morning light hit the old woodshed. The day passed, and the silence persisted. It was unsettling. By midday, a few birds started to tentatively chirp, but the usual chorus never returned. The forest felt empty, wary. That evening, we were sitting on the covered porch, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks to the west. The temperature was dropping fast. That's when we heard the first sound. It wasn't a growl or a howl or anything I could easily identify. It was a deep, guttural click. A rhythmic, almost mechanical thok, thok, thok sound coming from deep within the tree line at the edge of the property. It was loud enough to be clear, but far enough away that it was impossible to pinpoint the source. It lasted for about 30 seconds, then stopped, as abruptly as it began. "What was that?" Megan whispered, her eyes wide. She looked at me, the expert, for an answer. I didn't have one. I'd spent my life in these woods. I knew the sound of a woodpecker drumming on a hollow tree, the sound of a bull elk grinding its antlers, the cough of a bobcat. This wasn't any of those. It had a strange resonance, a wet, organic quality to the clicks that made the hair on my arms stand up. "I don't know," I admitted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Could be a sick deer, or maybe just the sound of a branch falling and echoing weirdly. I didn't believe it, and from the look on her face, neither did she. The woods remained silent after that. But now, the silence felt menacing. The next morning I decided to investigate. I took my rifle, a bolt-action point, 30-06 that had been my grandfather's, and my Chesapeake Bay retriever Gus. Gus was usually a bundle of boundless energy, practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of a walk in the woods. But that morning, he was hesitant. He whined at the door, his tail tucked low between his legs. I had to coax him out onto the porch, which was completely out of character for him. That should have been my second warning. We walked the perimeter of the clearing, Gus staying so close to my leg he was practically tripping me. He kept casting nervous glances into the dense shadows of the forest, his ears pinned back. I headed in the general direction of where I thought the clicking sound had come from. After about 10 minutes of walking along the edge of the woods, I found the tracks, and I stopped dead. They were huge, impossibly huge. They were printed clearly in a patch of damp earth near a small creek that ran through the property. The print was bipedal. That was the first thing that hit me, 2 feet, not 4. It was shaped something like a massive dog's paw, with 4 distinct toe pads and a large heel pad, but it was elongated, almost like a human foot if a human had the paws of a wolf. And there were claw marks, deep gouges in the dirt, at least an inch long, extending from the tips of the toes. I knelt down, my rifle held loosely in my hand. I placed my own hand next to one of the prints. My hand, which is not small, barely covered half of it. I estimated the print was 16, maybe 17 inches long. The stride between the prints was enormous, easily 7 or 8 feet. Whatever made this was walking on 2 legs, and it was gigantic. Gus let out a low, guttural growl, his eyes fixed on the tree line. He was trembling. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear? No. A bear track is distinct, flat-footed, with 5 toes, and a bear walking on its hind legs for any distance would leave a waddling, uneven pattern. This pattern was straight, purposeful. A prank? Someone with a pair of custom-made boots? Out here? Miles from anywhere? It seemed absurd, but the alternative was unthinkable. I took a few pictures of the tracks with my phone, my hands shaking slightly. Then I backed away slowly, calling Gus to my side. I didn't turn my back on the woods until we were back in the clearing. I spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. I cleaned and oiled the .30-06 and loaded a magazine, leaving it propped in the corner of the living room, something I would never normally do. Megan could tell something was wrong. I showed her the pictures on my phone. Her face went pale. "What is that, Alex?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've never seen anything like it." We tried to rationalize it together. We came back to the prank idea. Maybe some local kids trying to scare the new people who'd moved into the old house. It was the only explanation that kept the world sane. We clung to it even though it felt flimsy and thin. That night, we locked the doors, drew all the curtains, and left the porch light on, something my grandparents, in all their years of living there, had never done. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Gus was asleep on the floor at the foot of our bed, but he was restless, whimpering and twitching in his sleep. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was woken up by a sound. It was a scratching, a low, deliberate scraping sound, coming from the back of the house, from the kitchen. Gus was awake instantly, standing stiff-legged and growling, a deep rumble in his chest. I slipped out of bed, grabbing the heavy mag light I kept on the nightstand. Megan was awake too, sitting bolt upright, her hand over her mouth. "Stay here," I mouthed, and crept out of the bedroom. The scratching stopped. I moved silently down the hallway, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The house was pitch black, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the living room windows. I reached the kitchen and paused, listening. Silence, then a soft, wet sniffing sound, right at the back door. It was followed by the distinct click of the doorknob turning. My blood ran cold. The back door was locked with a deadbolt. The knob turned as far as it would go, then rattled against the lock. It tried again and again. Whatever was out there was systematically testing the door, trying to open it. It wasn't a bear fumbling at the door. This was intelligent, deliberate. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't even think. I just retreated to the bedroom, grabbed the rifle, and told Megan to get in the closet and stay quiet. I could hear her trying to stifle her sobs. I went back to the living room, which had large picture windows facing the front yard and the porch. I stayed low, away from the windows, and positioned myself where I could see both the front and back doors. The rattling at the back door stopped. For a few agonizing minutes, there was only silence. Then, a new sound. a heavy dragging scrape along the side of the house. It was moving. It was circling. My military training kicked in, a cold, detached calm settling over the panic. I tracked the sound as it moved from the back, along the side of the house, toward the front porch. A large shadow blotted out the moonlight from one of the side windows. It was massive. It blocked the entire frame for a second. Then it was gone. It was on the porch. I heard the old wooden boards of the porch creak under an immense weight, a weight far greater than any man. The sound was slow, heavy, step, creak, step, creak. It was pacing, right outside the front door. I held my breath. The rifle stock pressed hard against my shoulder. The barrel pointed at the door. I could hear it breathing. A deep, raspy sound, like air being forced through a wet sieve. It sniffed at the door, long and loud. Then, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards of the house. It was a sound of pure malice, of predatory hunger. Then I saw it. Through the narrow window next to the front door, I saw a shape. It was tall, hunched over, its silhouette stark against the weak glow of the porch light. I could only see a part of it, but it was enough. I saw a pointed snout, long and narrow like a wolf's. I saw tall, pointed ears that twitched, listening. And I saw an arm, impossibly long and thin, with a hand that looked disturbingly human, except for the thick black claws that tipped the fingers. The hand reached out and rested on the window frame. I could see the muscles and tendons shift under the coarse, dark fur. It was real. It was right there. The seed of doubt, the flimsy hope of a prank, was vaporized in an instant of pure, undiluted terror. This was not a man in a suit. This was not a bear. This was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, its head cocked as if listening to our frantic heartbeats through the thick wooden walls. Then, with a sudden, shocking violence, it slammed its fist against the door. The entire frame shook. The sound was like a car crash. Gus barked, a frantic, terrified sound. The creature outside answered with a roar, a deafening, full-throated explosion of sound that was part wolf howl, part lion's roar, and part something utterly alien. It began to attack the house. It threw its full weight against the front door again and again. The wood groaned and splintered. I knew the old lock wouldn't hold for long. I screamed for Megan to call 911, but then I remembered there was no cell service this deep in the mountains. The landline. The landline was in the kitchen. On the wall, right next to the back door, it had just tried to open. We were cut off. We were alone. The assault on the front door stopped. I heard it move off the porch. The heavy footsteps, crunching on the gravel driveway, a moment of silence. I prayed it was leaving. Then, a crash of breaking glass from the other side of the house. The dining room. It had broken a window. I scrambled across the living room, staying low, my mind racing. I had to get to that room, block its entry. As I rounded the corner into the dining room, I saw it. It was framed in the shattered window, illuminated by the moonlight. It was pulling itself through the opening it had made. The description from the glimpse on the porch was horribly accurate, but seeing the whole thing was 1,000 times worse. It was easily 7, maybe 8 feet tall, even hunched over as it was. Its body was a grotesque parody of a man's, with massive, powerful shoulders and a lean, corded torso covered in shaggy, dark gray fur. Its arms were too long for its body, ending in those 5-fingered clawed hands. But its legs were the worst part. They were bent backwards, like a dog's, with the hock joint halfway up the leg. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait as it stepped through the broken window into our house. And the head. It was the head of a monstrous wolf or a German shepherd, but there was a terrifying intelligence in its eyes. They weren't the simple, wild eyes of an animal. They were cunning. They glowed with a faint, yellowish light, and they were fixed on me. It let out another one of those low, rumbling growls, and I could see its lips, black and leathery, pull back to reveal a set of enormous yellowed fangs. I didn't think. I reacted. I brought the rifle up and fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The .30-06 slug hit it square in the chest with a wet, meaty thud. The impact was immense. It should have knocked any man off his feet. It should have killed a grizzly bear. The creature staggered back a single step, looked down at the bleeding hole in its chest as if it were a minor annoyance, and then looked back at me. The growl deepened, turning into a sound of pure rage. It wasn't just a beast. It was a monster. And I had just made it angry. It lunged. I've seen animals move fast, but this was different. It crossed the 10 feet between us in an instant. I tried to cycle the bolt on the rifle, but I was too slow. A long, clawed hand shot out and swatted the gun from my grasp. It flew across the room and clattered against the far wall. The same hand grabbed the front of my shirt and lifted me off the floor like I weighed nothing. I was slammed back against the wall, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Its face was inches from mine. I could smell its breath, a foul stench of rot and old blood. Those intelligent, hateful yellow eyes burned into mine. I lashed out, kicking and punching, but it was like hitting a brick wall. It didn't even flinch. It opened its massive jaws, and I prepared to die. Then, from the hallway, Gus came flying into the room. He was 100 pounds of muscle and loyalty, and he launched himself at the creature's leg, sinking his teeth in deep. The monster roared in pain and surprise, its grip on me loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I dropped to the floor, gasping for air. The creature turned its attention to Gus. It backhanded him with tremendous force, sending my dog flying across the room. He hit the wall with a sickening crack and lay still. A wave of pure, white-hot rage washed over my terror. It had hurt my dog. It had invaded my home. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not for the rifle, but for the fireplace in the living room. My grandfather, a man who believed in being prepared, kept a vintage fire axe mounted on the wall next to the hearth. It wasn't just decorative. He kept it razor sharp. I ripped it from its mountings as the creature, having dispatched Gus, turned and started toward me, limping slightly from the bite. It came into the living room, moving more cautiously now. It saw the axe in my hands and paused, its head tilting in a disturbingly analytical way. It recognized the threat. This was the intelligence I had sensed. It wasn't just a brute, it was a hunter. It knew what tools were. It crouched low, its long arms spread wide, and began to circle me, its claws clicking on the hardwood floor. I held the axe in a two-handed grip, my knuckles white. We were in a standoff in the moonlit living room of my grandparents' house, a man with an axe and a monster from a nightmare. It feinted to the left, and I shifted my weight to match it. It was testing my reactions. It was smart. Too smart. I knew I couldn't win a direct fight. It was too strong, too fast. My only chance was to get out, to get to the truck. I backed slowly toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms and, more importantly, to the side door in the laundry room that led to the driveway. "Megan," I yelled, my voice raw, "get ready to run the truck, now!" The creature chose that moment to charge. It didn't lunge this time. It ran a low, powerful sprint on those horribly jointed legs. I didn't have time to think. I swung the axe with all the strength I had. It wasn't a clean hit. The monster was too fast. It tried to dodge, but the heavy steel blade caught it across the shoulder and upper arm. The axe bit deep, and the creature shrieked, a high-pitched, piercing sound of agony that was terrifyingly different from its roars and growls. It sounded almost human. It stumbled back, clutching its wounded arm. Dark, thick blood poured from the gash, soaking its fur. The axe was wrenched from my grip, still embedded in its shoulder. It looked at the axe, then at me, and the intelligence in its eyes was replaced by pure, feral hatred. It ignored the grievous wound and lunged for me again. I dodged to the side, scrambling away. As I did, Megan appeared in the hallway. She wasn't running for the door. In her hands, she held a can of bear spray. "Alex, get down!" she screamed. I dropped to the floor without hesitation. She unleashed a massive orange cloud of concentrated capsaicin directly into the creature's face. It had been focused on me and never saw her coming. It reeled back, screaming again, that same awful, high-pitched shriek. It clawed frantically at its eyes, shaking its massive head from side to side. This was our chance. "Now!" I yelled, scrambling to my feet. I grabbed her hand and we ran. We didn't look back. We sprinted through the laundry room, fumbled with the lock on the side door, and burst out into the cold night air. The truck was parked 20 feet away. It felt like a mile. My keys were in my pocket. My hand shook so badly I could barely get them out. The creature was roaring in pain and fury inside the house. We could hear it crashing around, destroying furniture. I finally got the key in the lock and threw the doors open. Megan scrambled into the passenger seat as I jumped behind the wheel. The engine turned over on the first try. The sound, a beautiful, life-saving roar. I slammed the truck into reverse, not even bothering with the headlights, and stomped on the gas. The truck fishtailed on the gravel, tires spitting rocks, and I spun the wheel, pointing us down the long driveway toward the road. As I flicked on the headlights, their beams cut a swath through the darkness, and the first thing they illuminated was the house. The creature was standing on the porch. It had ripped the fire axe from its own shoulder and was holding it in its good hand. The bear spray had clearly worn off enough for it to see again. Its yellow eyes glowed with an unholy light in the truck's beams. It watched us, not moving, just standing there, bleeding, holding the axe. It was a chillingly intelligent posture, a promise. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I floored it. We careened down the half-mile-long driveway, branches scraping against the sides of the truck. I didn't slow down when we hit the gravel county road. I just prayed no one was coming the other way. My focus was singular. Put as much distance between us and that house as possible. Megan was sobbing in the seat next to me, a low, keening sound of pure shock and terror. I reached over and put a hand on her knee, trying to offer some comfort. But my own hands were trembling so hard the whole truck was shaking. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 15 minutes, we hit paved road. I pushed the truck to 80, then 90 miles per hour. I didn't slow down until we saw the first streetlights of the nearest town. Only then did I allow myself to look in the rear-view mirror. There was nothing behind us but darkness. We hadn't been followed. We were safe. Or, at least, we were away. The first thing we did was drive to the emergency room. Not for us, but for Gus. I had scooped him up before we ran. He was unconscious, breathing shallowly. I carried him in, babbling some story to the vet on call about a hit and run. He had a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs, but the vet thought he would pull through. Leaving him there was one of the hardest things I've ever done. From there, we went to the sheriff's office. It was a small 2-man department, and the deputy on the night shift looked at us like we were crazy. We were a mess. Covered in dirt, Megan's face stained with tears, my shirt torn and dotted with the creature's dark blood. I tried to tell him the story, tried to be calm and rational, the way a good witness should be. I told him about the tracks, the sounds, the break-in. I told him about the creature. His expression went from bored to skeptical to vaguely concerned for our mental state. "Son," he said, his voice tired, "it sounds like you had a run-in with a bear. A big one, maybe. They can get confused this time of year, looking for food before hibernation. Breaking a window isn't unheard of." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice rising. "It walked on 2 legs. It tried to open the door. It was smart. I shot it, center mass, with a .30-06, and it barely slowed down." I showed him the pictures of the tracks on my phone. He glanced at them, then shrugged. "Could be anything," he said dismissively. "Overlapping prints, a trick of the light. Look, you two are clearly shaken up. You go get a motel room for the night. I'll drive out to your place in the morning, take a look around. I'll bet you $1 I find bear signs all over the property." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him by his uniform and shake him until he understood. But I saw the look in his eyes. He had already decided. We were just some city folk who got spooked by a shadow in the woods. We were traumatized, hysterical. Anything we said was unreliable. Defeated, we left. We found a cheap motel on the edge of town and checked in. Neither of us slept. We just sat on the edge of the bed, the flimsy chain on the door and watched the sun come up. Around 10 the next morning, my phone rang. It was the sheriff's office. It wasn't the young deputy. It was the sheriff himself, a man named Henderson. His voice was gruff. "Mr. Carter, I'm out at your grandparents' property. My deputy told me your story. We've had a look around." "And?" I asked, my heart pounding. "And we found evidence of a break-in, just like you said. Broken window in the dining room. Place is a real mess inside. We also found a lot of blood, but the tracks outside, they're all bare. Big black bear from the looks of it. Must have been one hell of a bruin to make a mess like this." "That's impossible," I said, my voice flat. "Those tracks were not from a bear." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, son," he said, his tone softening slightly, but in a way that felt patronizing. "A traumatic experience can play tricks on your mind. You see what you expect to see or what you're most afraid of. Your dog got hurt, your house got wrecked. It's understandable. My advice is you hire a crew to clean the place up, board that window, and don't come back for a while. Let the animal move on." He was dismissing me, erasing what happened. They found the blood, they found the damage, and they pasted a neat, tidy, and completely wrong explanation over it. They had to. The alternative was admitting that something was living in those woods that defied all explanation, something that was hostile and intelligent and impossibly strong. It was easier to call us crazy. I knew then that we would get no help, no validation. We were on our own with this knowledge. Before he hung up, I asked him one more thing. "Did you find my rifle or a fire axe?" Another pause. The rifle was there, leaning against a wall. No axe, though. Maybe the bear dragged it off. Animals do strange things. He didn't believe it any more than I did. The conversation was over. We stayed in town for another week, until Gus was well enough to travel. We never went back to the house. I hired a crime scene cleanup crew from a city 2 hours away, telling them there had been a severe animal attack. I told them to be discreet, to box up anything personal they could salvage and put it in storage, and to board up the entire house when they were done. I sold the property a month later through a realtor for far less than it was worth. I never set foot on it again. I couldn't. The story should end there. But a few weeks after the sale went through, I got a plain manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a grainy photocopy of a newspaper article from the local town paper dated 1978. The headline read, "Hunter Missing, Companion Tells Strange Tale." The article detailed how 2 local hunters had gone missing in the same area as my grandparents' house. One of them was found a week later, wandering on a logging road, suffering from exposure and shock. He told the sheriff at the time a rambling story about a tall, hairy creature with the head of a wolf that had attacked their camp and dragged his friend away. The official explanation was that the man had suffered a psychotic break after his friend had been attacked and killed by a bear. At the bottom of the photocopy, someone had written in neat block letters, "They don't want you to know, stay away." I don't know who sent it. Maybe the sheriff. Maybe the old deputy. Someone in that town knew. Someone believed me. It's been 2 years. Megan and I live in the city now. We sold our house in the suburbs and moved into a high-rise apartment. She still has nightmares. I do too. I don't take wildlife photos anymore. I can't. I can't stand to be in the woods, to hear the wind in the trees, to feel that quiet, that silence that I used to find so peaceful, now feels like a threat. It's the silence of a world holding its breath. My dog Gus, he recovered physically, but he's never been the same. He's nervous, timid, and he panics if he's left alone in the dark. I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hallucination brought on by fear. It was a living, breathing creature. Something that walks on two legs and has the head of a canine. It's intelligent enough to test a doorknob, to recognize a weapon, and to hold a grudge. It's strong enough to rip a man from his feet and tear a house apart. And it's still out there. I carry the knowledge of it with me every day. It's a heavy burden. It's the knowledge that the world is not as safe as we think it is, that the maps are wrong, that there are still dark, unexplored corners of the world, and in those corners, monsters are real. So I'm telling you this for whatever it's worth. Listen to that feeling in your gut. When the woods go silent, when the hair on your arms stands up for no reason, don't try to rationalize it. Don't be brave. Just leave. Run. Because you do not want to see what is watching you from between the trees.